When you're doing a big project like a kitchen, there's a lot involved before you actually start making decisions and actually spending money. Do you have any excess cash flow? Are you able to save in the first place? I think what too many people do is they put it on the credit card and then they figure out how to pay the credit card back. Welcome to Tell Your Boss I Quit with me, Pete Gutekunst, the podcast where we help you financially bridge from where you've started to the life goals you've imagined.
Peter, how are you doing?
I am doing awesome.
What a great way to start.
How are you?
Peter? Yes, that's the best way to start this. We want to get there. Obviously, we're in the middle of the year, 2025. If anyone's checked the calendar, we've made it to the middle of the year. Let's start talking about what we should be kind of looking at this time of year as like just a kind of like a check-in on your financials, based on, we've gone through the tax season. We're now in the middle of the year. We set some goals at the beginning. Let's talk about maybe maybe you can kind of recommend how people may kind of approach checking in on their financial goals at this point in the year.
Yeah, mid-year time, it's like, it's the time, when you make a New Year's resolution, you have all the best intentions of the world. This is the time of year where you're like, oh, wasn't I supposed to be doing something by now? So I think you get off to a really good start. So the middle part of the year is a very good time to check in and make sure that you're doing the things you thought or planned, intended to do, but don't despair. Just because you haven't been doing them, that's not a reason or an excuse to put it off to next year. This is a great time to start planning or reinvent your plan or just get it back on track because it's real common. Summer's coming and you've got all sorts of things going on and you're not thinking about your plan, but this is still the perfect time to get things back in order. So that's one of the things I find. I'll ask questions of people and, oh, I don't know, and you just lost track. So this is the time. You've done your taxes. You got your income tax return back. So you probably had some things in order. You probably are a little more tuned in at that time of year. And so now just think of that, put those things down as what's going to happen this year and going forward. It's funny you bring this up because I just went through this myself. I do this podcast. I talk about journaling. I talk about you don't have to have this real incredible budget, but you want to have things kind of in order and keep track of it. And so I've been working on a big project at my shore house, and I had a kitchen going on, and I just had a lot of things happening that weren't part of my regular routine spending plan. And so you still have to pay the credit card bill. You might have money, a check here or there, however you go about paying it. And so that was all in the same flow that I was tracking, and it kind of threw things off the rails a little bit. So when you bring up the question, what do you do in the middle of the year? Well, I got behind, but I only got behind by, not even 6 months and got things back in order and sorted all of that out. So that's what you want to do in the middle of the year is one, this is sort of your mid-year New Year's resolution is get back on track. Just because you didn't do what you said you were going to do, if you've started a little bit, get back on track and don't despair. I think that's really what you want to use this time of year for. So I kind of rambled on there, Justin. I don't know if I kind of hit the mark what you're looking for, but we can kind of unpackage this a little bit.
Yeah, and just I want to touch on it one more time. I know obviously middle of the year, this is a great time when you look on a calendar. It's a benchmark, middle of the year. Yeah. You can kind of assess this. Is there, and your answer, can already probably tell it's all the time. But is there a more how often should realistically someone be kind of reassessing and evaluating kind of like their financial progress throughout the year?
If we're using the journal concept and we're journaling what we're doing, that's really a monthly routine, I would say. It might even be a little more frequently than that, but you don't have to really get granular in that journaling process. And what's nice about that is that if you do fall off, if you were doing it a little bit, it's easier to catch up 1 or 2 or 3 months than it is to kind of do it all at once. So first off, the answer is you have to get started and you have to kind of build the habit, and it's easier to kind of get back on track than it is to start out in the first place. So we're talking about the middle of the year, and a lot of things come June or July that you assumed might be the case back in December or January. So that's where this is a good time of year is you're reflecting. And if you're doing that maybe you're only going back 6 months. So that's not a real burdensome time period to have to deal with. But it's also, because, if we're looking at it from a calendar year, it's also midway through the year. So looking at where you thought you were going to be and kind of getting yourself back. If this is what I said I was going to do in January, and now I'm going to put to it. And maybe you got a little extra time sitting on the beach or doing whatever you do in the summer. Maybe you're on an airplane and, you got a little bit of time sitting there for a couple hours on a flight. Just bring a notepad. And that's when you can start writing down some things and get focused on it.
So someone who maybe hasn't taken the time like every month, or and like you
Right.
said, we are at the mid year, and like they're looking at the calendar saying, yeah, we should really kind of look into this.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, or what are you seeing that others are seeing that are some common pitfalls that they might be overlooking at this time of year?
Yeah, I think really it comes down to is you just kind of let life kind of spiral along and just kind of run its course, and you get focused on those things. When I started in this business years ago, we used to say people spend more time planning their vacation than they do planning their long-term financial plan. And you think about what you're going to pack and you're going to bring, and what's the weather going to be like? Do I bring shorts? Do I bring long pants? You really kind of put a lot of thought into that, and people aren't doing that necessarily with their financial plan. So that's what I see, is that that's really where I feel having an advocate or a partner or a financial planner as your teammate helps keep you focused on that, just to gather, because really it's about gathering the information and then putting it into a place where you can keep track of it. So that's what I see is, on the one extreme, we'll ask for what do you spend and what's going on. And I don't know, or I'm doing this kitchen project. I spent, in my case, I bought all new appliances one month, and then the installation, the deposit for the cabinets, but then the rest of the payment was another time. And then the installer got paid. So you had these large numbers that you were prepared for. They all got kind of commingled into your spending. And that's an easy excuse. Well, I don't think I spend that much because I was doing this, that, or the other thing. That's where I think it's really helpful to take a step back. And if that's the case, then just go back. That's what I did personally was, hey, this is off. I hadn't been staying on top of it as well as I normally do. And I had these big expenses, and I went back and I could see things were out of whack. And so then I was able to go back nowadays with an app. I could look at the Lowe's app, I spent this there and I did that there. That's really, I think, what, it's not that hard. It's just, you have to think about it is, what was I doing in October? And today's technology, a lot of it's right on that phone, and you can just look at it and find, oh yeah, that was something I can peel out. That's where I think you want to do this we're kind of, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's like your New Year's resolution, but you're constantly doing a New Year's resolution. You're either on top of it and patting yourself on the back for doing a good job, or, okay, today's the day that I actually start doing my New Year's resolution. That's what I find is you just need to push to get yourself straightened out and journaling. And I'll come back to that. I think, I don't know what your next question is going to be, but I'll come back to that. I mean, when it comes to journaling or keeping track of these things, when you start to form the habit, it's easy to lose the habit. But if you formed it in the first place, it's easier to go back to something than it is to make it up from scratch.
I think the world would be just a better place if we, instead of New Year's resolution, it was new month's resolution, right? Because we could just start at the beginning of every month and reset. I think that's the better move. We need to shift that direction.
When you were a kid, did they ever tell you, today is the first day of the rest of your life? You ever hear that?
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
Today is the first day of the rest of your financial plan. So let's get at it.
Let's get people motivated for sure.
Yep.
Okay, so real quick, there's one thing that I want to go back to. You mentioned you have a shore house. First off, where's my invite? I haven't been invited to this. I'd love to see it.
The porch is always open.
Yes, awesome. I appreciate that. So when you were going through those obviously bigger expenses, I know kitchen remodel is not exactly a fun and financial experience.
Yep.
For those larger expenses, how do you kind of help people separate that from their average expenses? Like, obviously they know, if they're going through and they're journaling, they're making sense of it. They know every month kind of what each month to month looks like. For these larger expenses, how do you differentiate the buckets there?
Right, right. That's exactly right. How do you differentiate the buckets? You said it exactly right. Because at the end of the day, a bill gets paid and it typically goes through the account that you're keeping track of for your regular spending. So the one thing I always say, whether you're on track or getting back on track or you've never done this before, is you just go through what you spent in a month and you can pull out why was this month so out of the character. So if you normally spend 5,000 a month and you spent 7, why did I spend that extra 2,000? And so that's one way to go back and find something to look for instead of going looking at every line over every 30-day period over every month. You're just going back, all right, well, I've isolated one is the month I need to go back and look at. And so that's, I think, where you want to do that is you also know I bought a new car, or in my case, I was working on the fridge. So I know I had these larger expenses that started very late August, maybe September, and ran through the end of the year. And now there's a few more smaller, but larger than usual. Well, smaller than the big things that are kind of finishing out the job. So those are things that you can go back on and pull them out because you knew it was happening. And that's really, I think, at the end of the day, is you're just getting into the pattern. Um, so that's how you go about it. Is it's just it takes a little bit of time that you have to go back, but if you know that I only have to look at 1 month of activity, that's far less daunting than going back and what did I do in the last 6 months. So that's how we would approach it. When you're doing a project like that, in my case, when you're doing a project like that, the dollars were there; they weren't necessarily in the checking account that was going to ultimately pay the credit card bill to pay for the appliances. But the dollars were there, but those dollars kind of moved through that savings into my checking account. So that's another part of it too, is you might have an account that you had set aside to build up the money to pay for these things. And it's when it comes out of that and passes through your regular account. Maybe you can just go back and think, all right, well, I know I had big expenses. Maybe I go back through my savings account and what came out of there and why. And that's another way of easily identifying what doesn't belong in your regular monthly spending.
So I know you did just kind of answer this, but if someone's watching this particular one right here, and I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if they're seeing on the horizon, maybe next month or the month after, that there is a big expense coming,
Yeah.
what's the first step that they take to kind of shift that money aside for the big expense so they can be prepared for when they make that purchase?
Yeah. Before you even start working on the kitchen, for example, is do you have any excess cash flow? Are you able to save in the first place? So I would like to do a project, and this project is going to cost me so much money. And I think what too many people do is they put it on the credit card and then they figure out how to pay the credit card back. So try to think a little bit ahead. When you're doing a big project like a kitchen, there's a lot involved before you actually start making decisions and actually spending money. So you can get an idea of what you might be spending and how will you afford to pay off this credit card you think you might pay off. So do it in advance. So that's where you've got the savings. I think a lot of people may have, a little excess income and they trickle into and build up a savings account that ultimately gets to a point where, I've got some extra money that I should be investing, or hey, there's some things I would like to do, like my kitchen. Maybe I could put this toward the kitchen because I know I'm going to backfill the savings because that's how I got here in the first place. So ideally, you're going to have saved the money first, or I would say then second best, would you've saved some money, you're going to pay up front, you're going to put some things on a credit card, but you're going to pay back the credit card the same way you build up the savings. And maybe that's a way of getting something done or started a little sooner rather than waiting to having saved everything. But those are the ways I think you want to manage those projects. Is you want to, it's a good idea actually to have a separate account and just put money in that other account that's quote untouchable. And it's for that purpose. Rather, you definitely don't want to mingle it in with your regular everyday spending. That's where dollars disappear.
Okay, so I feel like that was a little bit of an easier question, right? Is where to allocate the money for an expense you are
Yeah, yeah.
that you know is coming. But
Hmm.
let's talk about, if somebody's taking this time and it's the middle of the year and they're looking at their finances saying, maybe I'm not quite on track. Maybe I'm fallen behind at this point
Hmm.
and I'm not where I want to be.
Right.
What are some kind of practical tips for people to kind of, that are seeing that and assessing it and are in that area of the
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great point. You might say, I'm going to have X amount of dollars by such and such a date. And then you get there. So I think I'm going to have saved half of the kitchen money by June. And here it is, June. And wait a minute, I don't have that money. So I think that's a little bit of a reality check is I'm doing this kitchen. I'm going to do this kitchen. And then you get to this point, maybe I can't quite afford that, or maybe I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer than I thought to build it up. You need to reassess that. We tend to make decisions emotionally and for any number of other reasons. And, I always say the dollars shouldn't drive everything, but they definitely are very important. So we don't want to just do something emotionally and then later find out we totally can't afford it. So, that's when you look at this point. That's why it's good to assess. I'm supposed to have the money for the kitchen. I don't have enough. Maybe I'm not going to do the kitchen till the fall. Maybe this is a next year project. I think that's where you have to, bring the dollars into the goal.
So let's put on like your psychology hat, which I know you have a bunch of hats while you're doing this. Yeah, but what is there like a mindset shift that you can help somebody with, or that might be maybe a little discouraged that they're at the mid-year point and they're not hitting their goals? Is there a way to kind of push them in the direction that's obviously that makes sense for them?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a handful of things that a person can do. One is that your investments are part of this too. So, the last couple of years have been very strong in investment years, and so we tend to kind of leave them be, and then when the project comes in, I'll spend it. Well, maybe let's put that money aside and put that into the savings account. So there might be some dollars that have grown that weren't there before because of market growth. And it's okay to kind of take off some of those gains and put them over here on the side. So that might be a way of finding the money, some of the money. And again, how does that affect your long-term plan if you make that shift? That's one thing. I think the other thing is just kind of getting a reality check on what your flow is. And if you thought you were going to be, that's why this mid-year check is so important. If you thought you were going to be somewhere and you're not quite there, that's a way to identify a problem. And the problem might be that you didn't really evaluate your spending quite right and you spend a little bit more than you thought. Your problem might be that you could have afforded doing it, but you let your dollars leak in places that were okay. But now, if you prioritize it, you say, well, if I was more disciplined and hadn't done that in these last few months, I would have this money and then I could go on with this project that I wanted. So some people have the luxury of just having a little excess cash flow and it comes a little easier. And some people have to be a little bit more disciplined. But this is a way for you to see where that issue might be. And then unfortunately, you might just say, I wanted to get my kitchen done just like the guy across the street and my neighbor next door. And I can't quite make that work because the dollars just aren't lining up. So I think it's better to plan ahead and think ahead and plan to do a project like that 6 months in the future. And then you get there. Okay, well, if I had done it, spent it, how would I have paid for it? If I was going to put it on a credit card, you get a better way of assessing it. So I think that's really why you do this is you just kind of see, if you have enough and how well it's going to work out. And when it's close, that's when people unfortunately kind of put their head in the sand and they don't want to believe that or think about it. And it might just take a little extra discipline for that person to find where the dollars are. Or like I said, it might just be, then we have to prioritize or really evaluate the right goals that you can manage.
I think that's funny. I know if you're setting a goal at the beginning of the year and you say, at the middle of the year, I want to redo the kitchen, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Do you see that people like they might not be where they want to be, but they're so hard headed that they say, listen, we're making this happen no matter what, and
Yeah.
they're gonna do it and then deal with the aftermath afterwards?
That's exactly the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm doing the kitchen and it's going to happen. I have time to do it this summer and I've been waiting forever and I'm seeing everyone in the neighborhood do their kitchen. This is my year to do the kitchen. And so the time comes and you don't have quite enough. Well, I'll just put it on the credit card anyway and figure it out later. And that's a challenge, just because of that very reason. So I've talked about lifestyle creep in the past. I've talked about all these things where money leaks into other places, and it's okay. I mean, the ideal financial plan is you don't have to think about the checks that you're writing or the money you're spending. You want to go out to dinner and have a good time. You want to do that and not have to think, do I have enough this month to pay for this going out to dinner? So you want to have a little bit of a cushion. But when we're talking about these big projects, well, maybe for some people, that's not going out to dinner for a little while. Maybe for some people, it's just excess income that who knows what they spend it on, but they didn't earmark it. So that's really where I think it just comes down to that discipline. And unfortunately, yes, people just say, I'm doing it. And it's so much harder to get out of that hole. It's so much harder when you have money on a credit card and you're paying high credit card interest. Now you're spending a lot of money that does nothing for anybody. It doesn't get you a higher cabinet, quality cabinet. It doesn't get you a nicer dinner. It's just money going to the bank that doesn't end up in your house and your home improvement or your life enjoyment. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is getting the dollars to work as most efficiently as possible for your goals.
So we've talked about that side. Let's talk about the other side, because this is the more fun side. Is you're at the mid-year point and you're looking at the goals that you set at the beginning of the year, and you're kind of realizing, huh, I'm might be a little ahead of schedule here,
Yeah.
or like,
Yeah,
things have
yeah.
progressed in a way that's going great. How
Yep.
do you kind of sit down with somebody and help them reassess their goals in the middle of the year in a positive way?
And I'm glad you asked that because, a lot of times people think financial planning and they hear the word budget and that means they have to cut. It means they have to be really careful and cautious. And we were saying, what about the person who's kind of close to the number? But that's a great question. Is I have more money coming in and I have more saved. That's a perfect opportunity to also reassess your goals. And the reason is I didn't think I could afford a new kitchen. Gosh, I can. I was hoping to, rent 2 weeks at the shore this summer, and I didn't think I could, and now I can. So now all of a sudden you start to see things that you would like to do, but weren't sure you even could, and it just didn't make it happen. So setting goals and reassessing goals is not a bad thing. It's not you don't have enough and what happened and what went wrong. It's also I clearly can do some things. I've already proven myself financially. So now what do I want to do with this proven financial, cash flow or savings? What do I want to do with it? Now I can actually set some goals and be excited about it because I already know how to afford it. And that's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, I gotta imagine that's a lot of fun for you to work with people that are in that situation where they're like, "Oh yeah, look at all this. We found some
Yeah.
stuff here." Yeah, you can get to move that around and kind of figure out what they want to do there.
Well, what's neat about it is say, for example, someone wants to move into a new home and maybe it's an upgrade, let's call it. And they don't want to just go out and buy the house. If they're, being frugal, being financially sound, they don't want to just go out and buy the most expensive house that they could possibly afford. That's what the mortgage lender will tell you. That's what the realtor will show you, that kind of a house. But so that's to your point is when you have accumulated this money, it can go to one of two things. It can either just stay saved and or invested. So let's say it's going to be invested. Well, then we can assume it's going to grow and be worth something in the future. Or it's money that you have for something here and now. And that's the beauty of being in that. And that's what I love doing about that is if we're doing a good job of measuring the future and we can say, you know what, it's nice that you have this and you might be able to retire sooner or do something 20 years from now differently, but you're pretty good. You're on pace for doing the things you think you want to do 20 years from now. It's okay to spend this money and buy a shore house. It's okay to spend this money and do your kitchen. It's okay, you're not damaging the long-term future. And that's what I love doing the most is people often come and are worried they can't afford things. And this is really about identifying what you can afford and what you can do now, and you're not sacrificing your future. I think if you flip on an advertisement, or if you just talk, get the save as early as you can, as much as you can mantra from the financial services industry, they're going to make you feel like it's not good to spend your money now and enjoy your life now. And that's exactly what you should be doing, just not at the sacrifice of the future. So you're blending it together, keeping track. That's how you figure that out and feel good about it. And when you spend money that you feel comfortable spending, it feels so much better than going, did I really afford that kitchen? That's a little self-defeating.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to touch on, because we're talking middle of the year, and end of the year, beginning of the year is really when people kind of think about their taxes.
Yeah.
The middle of the year is not a bad time either.
Not a bad time, right?
Let's talk about how people can kind of proactively plan ahead for their taxes before they're scrambling.
There's a lot going on in the middle of the year. Think about it. If you filed your taxes, you shared with me earlier, you used to like to get your taxes done as soon as possible. And now you're like, hey, I don't have to take care of this until April 15th. So, so maybe we're all getting our taxes done late April, middle April. And so it's April, May. We've gotten all of last year's information. We have a good picture of what happened last year, which gives us a good idea of what's going to happen this year. So, that's a great starting point. And so now we're just going forward and starting to gather information. So think about what you needed and had for your taxes, and maybe just do a mid-year, check-in. These were the things I was looking for at the end of the year, and I was going back 12 months. What if I just make sure I'm all squared away for the first 6 months? So then come December, I'm only looking for 6 months information. That's one thing. The other thing is that you have half of a year of information. So you know how this year may look different than last year, because maybe you had big gains last year and there maybe don't appear to be the case this year, or maybe there's some losses that you can take right now. And so tax loss harvesting is when you have losses in an account and you can sell positions, realize the losses so they go on your tax return. And, that helps you tax wise. But there's ways to do that and still basically remain invested in the same strategy. Well, guess what? A lot of that gets done at the end of the year. A lot of that is, let's look at what losses we can take and help you with your taxes in November. Well, maybe the first half of the year isn't going so well, and there's some losses that could be realized now. But if you come back and do it in November, those tax losses for tax purposes have been gained out. So, it's a good idea to do that. You can be doing that. I think if you're a small business owner, it's a good idea to gather everything. If you do QuickBooks or what have you, and if you work with an accountant, it's not a bad idea to send them, here's where I am in the middle of the year. How different do I look from last year? And then you can kind of say, well, if the second half is like the first half, or the first, one half and another quarter of a year or so are going to be indicative, kind of plan ahead. That's what you're doing right now. And what's nice about it is you're not doing your tax return. You are, you're just gathering information. So you don't have to get granular and really wrapped up in it. You just have a little bit of, things like that you need to do. So that's really, I think those are the things you're doing in the middle of the year, is you're just kind of making sure you're prepared.
Well, I had other questions, but you just covered them all in that answer.
I read your mind.
Yeah, that was it. You nailed everything. I wanted to follow up on kind of, obviously how your last year's return can kind of affect. If nothing's really changed, you can kind of use that, leverage that to kind of.
You know what we do? We get your return every year, and I have a tool. We put it in that tool, so it lays out exactly what last year was. But then we put this year's tax brackets, because they'll change a little bit every year for inflation. And then, did you get a big bonus last year that you're not going to get this year? Are you getting a big bonus, this year, instead with that you didn't get last year? I talk about gains or losses maybe that you had. Have you made a new investment that's generating more dividends and now you have more income? Did you take money out of an IRA? Not a great idea, but did you take money out of an IRA to pay for that kitchen? And so how is that going to be taxed? So there are things that you know as the year is going on that are going to be on next year's tax return. And so again, if we're at the middle of the year and we lay it out, okay, this is what last year looked like. I'm going to update some things that I know are happening or will or have happened year to date. And then I can start filling it in as I go. Then you're not as surprised, or you can do some things to either prepare or mitigate, the taxes going forward. So this is a great time to just gather, but not, you don't have to go through the hard grind of actually getting the tax return done like you do in the beginning of the year.
Pete, as always, fantastic knowledge. Middle of the year assessment. Anybody who just watched this, what else do you need? All right, you got everything you need. Go look at your finances, get those in order. And if you don't want to do it, call Pete.
Thank you for listening. And if our discussion resonates with you, let's start a conversation about what matters most to you. Go to goodfinancial.com, click contact, and schedule a 30-minute chat. I'd love to hear from you.